As Simon Sinek once said, how do you have happiness on a daily basis at work? You don't.
This podcast is brought to you by Archimed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of Archimed.
And I'm Caroline Squattrigo, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-sized company culture. Join us. On this episode, we are going to talk about employee happiness and engagement. How can companies support and measure this? Should we be supporting and measuring this? If not, what should we be measuring? Helping us answer these questions will be Beth Trammell from the Department of Psychology at Indiana University East. If you have been on the journey with us thus far, or even if you just listened to this episode's intro, then you know why we're here. We already know what company culture is and what it isn't. We discussed the drastic consequences of letting a culture deteriorate. And today we are here to figure out what it looks like when culture goes right and what metric to use, whether that's happiness, engagement, or fulfillment.
So Caroline, is that the question of the day?
Yes, Greg. Today we are going to talk about, does company culture have a role in employee happiness, engagement, and fulfillment, or is it the other way around? Or are those even the right metrics that we should be using?
Well, let's start maybe by defining each of those metrics. And these are my definitions, not Webster's. To me, happiness is a feeling. Sadness, happiness. And as a feeling, it's short term. It's a temporary kind of condition. You have engagement. How does an employee feel about their job and the company and the mission? Is there an understanding of the expectations and the norms? And is there a real relationship, between an employee and the company, between employee and fellow employees? And is it an authentic relationship? Fulfillment to me, and when I talk about how I feel as an owner, what I talk about is fulfillment. It's a deep, enriching, long-lasting kind of feeling. It's more than a feeling. It's an emotion. It's a sort of a blanket. And I think it's good to be happy and engaged. And I think it would be hard to feel fulfillment at work if you were unhappy and disengaged. So I think, to me, happiness and engagement are ingredients in fulfillment. What do you think?
I think you definitely need both happiness and engagement to get to fulfillment. I also think it's important to talk about one thing that can be kind of misleading. We read Happiness Traps by McKee before this episode, and she really points out that, just because something makes us feel happy, like you mentioned, happiness is this fleeting feeling, it's not long lasting, it might not really lead to that long-term fulfillment that we want. It might not engage us the way that we want. You mentioned that accomplishments make you happy, doing something like this podcast or solving a difficult puzzle. That might make us happy in the moment, but she points out these could be harmful in the long term because it might not be what we really want to do. We fall into this, I checked off a box, so I did a good job here. And I think that's something to remember as we go, that it's more than just that fleeting feeling of having done something we see as good.
I think you can find your way to be unfulfilled, unengaged, and unhappy and still accomplish all of your goals and objectives. And so you need to be able to disengage from the idea that accomplishment equals happiness, engagement, and fulfillment. It may be a helpful ingredient, but if you find no meaning in your work and you work for and with a bunch of assholes, and you're berated by your customers, and you have no advancement for within the company and no resources, but you've accomplished all your goals and objectives, I think that's a sad state of affairs. So a focus on accomplishment seems a little bit like a red herring to me.
Yeah, I would agree. So, based on what you've reviewed and your definitions of those three, I think we've kind of answered part of our question in that it looks like what we're shooting for is fulfillment. We want our employees to be fulfilled at and by their work. But we still have this other question. And that is, what role does company culture play in achieving that metric?
Okay, so the metric is fulfillment. And we already talked about how happiness and engagement are ingredients. And sort of a related to engagement is the meaning. So to me, these are the ingredients. You need to have a connection between your actions and the end result. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are we as an organization doing what we're doing? So to me, that's meaning. What do you think about happiness? Is there more to say on that topic?
I think we've covered happiness pretty well. I mean, I think it plays an important role. I mean, we all like that feeling of being happy, but I think it's important to keep those, longer term, or what do I really want out of this, goals in mind as well. I could feel good because, someone told me I'm doing a good job, but if I'm doing a good job at something I don't want to be doing in the first place, is that really a recipe for fulfillment? So maybe the goal is being happy in, a role that you're engaged in.
It almost sounds like a rabbit hole. If I went around to all of my employees and said, how can I make you happy today? I'll go back to Simon Sinek, the quote you said, which is, if you want to be happy every day at work, you're dreaming.
Yeah.
He said you can't. And I think that's right. So culturally, I think our role is not so much how can we make everybody happy, but rather, as an organization, can we actively avoid making our employees unhappy?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Well, and I think, sometimes you're not happy, but you're learning a lot and you're experiencing periods of growth. I mean, I certainly want to have more happy days than unhappy days, but I feel like, we tend to grow more from days maybe when we're struggling a little bit. So, I think you're onto something, Greg. Maybe it's just minimizing, the company's role in those unhappy days.
Yeah, and there are probably small things we can do, or not necessarily small, but easy. Express appreciation often, congratulate often. I'll go back to my favorite rule, the no asshole rule. We try and minimize drama and celebrate wins. We don't want to have office politics interfere with the performance of duties. I think all those things, if we can control those things and eliminate the bad stuff, we can avoid making employees unhappy. So then engagement. The notion of employee engagement, it requires somebody to be positively connected and absorbed by their work and fully committed to the organization and the company. So I think if you look at those two things, job satisfaction is, okay, I'm employed, I get paid, I take care of my family, there's some security there, but I think employee engagement is a much more difficult hurdle to clear. You need to feel a part of the organization. It's not a job, it's your organization, and you feel connected and absorbed by the work. That's a tough hurdle.
Well, yeah, and I think if you're really engaged and connected with your job, like that comes with a lot of emotion, like you really care, you really want to get the job done right. And so maybe you're more stressed out than you would be at a job that you're not as engaged with, and that's something interesting to think about too.
What can we do to encourage engagement? I think a lot of communication.
Yes.
So people can understand why they're doing what they're doing, where we're going as an organization, and what your role is in getting us there. And how do we do that? Well, our CEO, John, has regular company-wide meetings. He delivers a very informative newsletter. Your department, Caroline, supports the employees through the training and education, which really cements that it's not just a job, but it's a sort of a home. It's more than a job. We have lots of one-on-one meetings. And we have sort of an open book as it relates to our performance, so people understand exactly where we are and what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think as we're taking on communication initiatives, or anyone is, I think it's important to be authentic. You mentioned we're very transparent about our company's performance, and I think that's something that our employees really appreciate. And I know, like I come to count on it and look forward to hearing an update on our performance. I mean, you want to know how the company you're working for is doing. I also think it comes down to hiring the right people. who contribute to meaningful engagement and happiness, and fire people that detract from this. I mean, we've talked about the no assholes rule a couple of times now. If there's someone who is not living these, authentic values that our company once has decided that we would like to exemplify, then, maybe we're not the right fit. And I think that is one way to show that you're walking the walk as a leader and that you care about the employees who are engaged.
Yeah, Jim Collins in the book Good to Great, iconic business book and an iconic author, a quote from this book: "Good to great companies never hired the wrong person, even if the need was dire, but hired as many right people as were available, even without specific jobs in mind for them." And I love that. And I think if we really concentrated on where we screwed up on hiring, we found that we hired for need and not for fit. And it actually related to a recent job search that you and I worked on together, which is hiring great leaders without any job description or any open position. So I believe in that good to great company explanation of Jim Collins. And John talks about it all the time, our CEO. Hiring for fit is so much more important than hiring for need. Take your lumps being understaffed and don't rush it, and hire the right person. So how do you think we're doing as far as that's concerned?
Well, I might be a little bit biased because I am heavily involved in that hiring process, but I do, I think that I learned a lot about how to hire people from people like you and John, and that is something that I've heard so many times, that we hire for fit over skill set. Now, I'm not trying to say skill set isn't important, but maybe there's someone who we see has, the capability to learn a job. And, why not invest in that training if they're a person who wants the training, who's going to be actively engaged in the company? And we would much rather hire someone like that over someone who we could just plug in. They would know exactly what they're doing, but they're not engaged and they don't believe in what we're doing. There's so many people that we work with at Archimeg who came in with no experience. I'm one of those people, and I feel like I've learned from the people around me. We invest in a lot of training, and we have so many people who are high-level contributors now who, came in with no experience in the role that they were hired for. And I think we look at these people and we don't know where we would be without them, Yeah,
you're right. We've hired people with no sales experience to be salespeople, and they've been successful. We've hired people with a lot of sales experience, but because of cultural fit issues, they haven't been successful.
I don't think any one of our salespeople right now actually came into their role with a sales background, now that I'm thinking about it. And
right. But they all had the right DNA for sales, so we knew that they could acquire it, and that's through some of our measuring tools. But most importantly, they were a great cultural fit.
Absolutely.
So maybe we can get a little more information on happiness, engagement, fulfillment from a psychological perspective. Let's bring in IU psychology professor Beth Trammell, who knows a thing or two about all this, and see what she thinks about it.
Beth, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are very excited to have you. I have a feeling you're going to be able to help us with a lot of these kind of happiness questions we have, that they sound pretty simple, but I think they're a bit more in depth than we like to believe, and I'm hoping you can enlighten us a little bit here.
Yeah, happiness is one of those tricky things that we hear about like our whole lives, and yet it is among one of the toughest questions that I ask clients in the therapy room. What makes you happy? It's a real stumper.
So as we've been talking about, Greg and I, as we've been talking about company culture and good company culture, I feel like we often envision the result being happy employees. And I wonder what your thought is on that. As we've done research, we've heard a lot of buzzwords like engagement, fulfillment, achievement around company culture and like what role they have to play. What do you think the most kind of important or meaningful metric is there?
So this is a great question for companies and employees to be thinking about. And I guess I'll start by saying I would probably say happiness is not the greatest metric because, well, a couple of things. One, it's really hard to measure happiness. So, any good metric, we want to have like a clear objective that we can kind of measure in some way. And the good and the bad about happiness is that it's so subjective, right? It's so subjective and it's so contingent on so many other factors that are going on. So I'll give you an example, right? So if you do an employee outing, right, where you guys go out and let's say you go to a golf course and everyone has the exact same experience, right? We're all at the golf course together. And if you ask them when they left, like, how many of you feel happy or what level of happiness do you feel? You would have a huge variation, even though we all had this same similar experience. And that's because so much goes into what we subjectively call happiness. And let me tell you the other thing that's really a problem is that most of us really can't even tangibly say what makes us happy. I mean, that's the real truth of it all. Is like we think we know what makes us happy, but if you had to go ahead and list out like what in my life actually made us happy, you would say very vague things like health or family or time with my family. But even that's not the truth because there are plenty of times that you're with your family that you just downright aren't happy. So I think all of this to say there are so many things that go into when a person says, I feel happy, that it's just really hard to know what kinds of things really matter in that way.
Beth, that's good to hear because that's sort of where Caroline and I were landing on all this. And happiness seems to be fleeting, and it's different things to different people, as you mentioned. What is the
Mm-hmm.
right metric? What should we be concentrating on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're right on track with especially the term engagement. I mean, if you look in the research about, how are successful businesses being successful with regard to their culture, we look at this term of engagement. And, there's a few different definitions about, there are a few definitions out there about what engagement is. And the one that I really like is by Kahn from 1990. So it's been around for a while. And it has been described that employee engagement is, quote, the extent to which employees are involved and committed toward the organization and its values. And so for me, that really is kind of the clearest depiction of what being engaged at work means. And it's interesting because you don't necessarily see anything about specific output there, right? It's not necessarily engagement is defined as a certain level of output, though I think sometimes we think, well, the most engaged employees are the ones who are, meeting this quota or that quota at the end of the day. But this definition talks about involvement and commitment to the organization and its values. And for me, those are really key to, maybe this secondary overall happiness, or maybe this idea of meaning and fulfillment, kind of all wrapped up into that.
So would you say that if we avoid making people unhappy on a daily basis, and then we concentrate on getting folks involved and committed by talking about our values and by giving folks meaning in their work and articulating why it's meaningful, we might accomplish employee engagement. Is there any other factor that goes into having an employee over the longer term feel fulfilled, or is that enough?
Well, I think we also think about what is it that is going to motivate them to be engaged in the first place. And that's going to lead to kind of those secondary outcomes. And so we have a fair amount to even like a lot of evidence to say that when employees feel included, they have higher levels of engagement. And so we can pull it back then to inclusion, right? So how do employees feel included? How do they, on the contrary, feel excluded? And I think that that's kind of what you're getting at, Greg, about, not making people unhappy. And I think this sense of belonging or feeling of inclusion is a big part of, if I feel included here, if I feel valued here, I am going to be more involved and I am going to be more committed. And the good news about that is we have so many tangible ways that leaders and even other employees can be inclusive. So I think culture is developed through effective leadership, right? So the employees look to the leaders for how to behave, how to feel, how to react. And so if we're looking to have a culture of inclusion, if we're looking to have a culture of engagement, it starts with the leaders. And so I say that with sort of like an asterisk, right? That like, it doesn't necessarily mean the CEO or the CFO. It means whoever the employees see as the leader. So that might be someone else on the team who maybe isn't in a leadership role by title, but has a leadership role by culture, right? And so if that person is showing these inclusive behaviors of having sort of this commitment to having everyone's voice be heard, allowing the space for people to bring sort of their full selves to work, right? Honoring each person's experience and not discluding folks either intentionally or unintentionally. I think it starts with this leader and maybe a series or a group of leaders that are then creating this this set of expectations, really.
I think there's a lot more to learn about this, but we certainly appreciate your uh, commitment to helping folks like us understand the dynamics of happiness, because it helps us, it helps our organization, but more importantly, it helps all of our employees. And so would you like to say anything to our listeners or point them to additional resources?
I am on Facebook, MWM, Make Words Matter, with kids. I do a lot of parent training, a lot of teacher training, a lot of professional development. My website is makewordsmatterforgood.com. I really focus a lot on communication strategies, just to help people realize the impact that their words have on the people around them.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to that. In the meantime, stay safe out there, and thanks again for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. You too.
Well, that was super informative. I really enjoyed that. So, Caroline, what did we learn today?
I think we learned a lot today. One thing we really hit on was happiness is a moment. And while happiness is important, we should really be focusing on fulfillment. Engagement is also a key component. So overall, what we want to foster is an environment that provides many happy moments, that allows people to be engaged in their work, and that those two things ideally will lead to fulfillment.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's goes back to why we're in business, or at least why what gives me fulfillment happens to be the same thing that would give the employees fulfillment. So I want a company culture that fosters an environment where there's an opportunity for fulfillment, many happy moments, many opportunities for engagement where you're fired up about your work and not just along for the ride. And you're committed with your colleagues to the mission of the organization. You know where we're going, you know why it's important, and you know your role and how we're going to get there. So that's the name of the game, isn't it?
I believe so, Greg. If you enjoyed this podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. You can find more information about us and all of our episodes on our website, archimed.com. You'll find us under the What's New tab. On our next episode, we will discuss company values. What are they? What's the difference between company values and culture? We don't know. Helping us find out will be Josh Perry. Josh is chair and associate professor of the Business Law and Ethics Department at Indiana University. See you next time.